Hello everyone, my name is Marcellus. I'm one of the leaders at King's Church in Heathfield. And confession time. When I was 15 or 16 years old, I used to buy Men's Health magazine, which is bad enough, but it gets worse. And if you don't know, Men's Health magazine is like a health and muscle magazine. It's the sort of magazine where there's a guy in the front who is like topless, he's got a six-pack, he's got loads of muscles, his neck is like out there, and he's got no body fat at all. And Men's Health magazine is full of these articles about working out and being careful what you eat, how to eat salad 1,000 different ways. It's got these amazing titles. The articles have got amazing titles like Living Simply to Get Ripped or Carve Six-Pack Abs Before Summer's Over. They're actual titles of articles that I took off their website. Now what I want to do is I want to show you what happens when you work really hard. I'm joking. Because actually I didn't work really hard when I was 15 or 16. What would happen was I'd tootle up the shop, walk up there, I'd buy the magazine, and I would read the magazine, wait for it, whilst I watched television and ate cookies and drank full fat milk, which is potentially why I haven't taken my top off at this point. So what I want you to see is that I was getting all this information but not doing anything about it. And unfortunately, I've noticed that this is a bit of a theme in my life. Or a bit of a pattern in my life. I want to get organised, so I'll read a book on organisation, I'll watch a video on YouTube, I'll gather the information, but I won't actually do it. I won't actually do any organising. I want to manage my finances better. I'll gather the information, I'll get a plan together, but actually I don't execute. I don't change the way I spend. I wanted to get fit. So I just went out the shop and I bought the magazine. I gathered the information. I got a plan together without actually implementing it. Some of you are thinking, why am I in some weird confessional vlog? What's this got to do with Jesus? What's it got to do with the church? What's it got to do with God? What's it got to do with the Bible? I think we can have a men's health mindset with following Jesus. We can gather all the information, we can get the books, we can listen to the sermons and the podcasts, we can get the t-shirts and not actually do what he tells us to do or live our lives in the way that he tells us to live our lives. There's a whole theory in psychology about if you kind of investigate something, your mind feels like you've done a bit of it, so it kind of lets you off the hook. So which is exactly what was happening with me and Men's Health, and what can happen when we investigate something a little bit, but and feel satisfied instead of actually doing it. For example, I am pretty sure I've read more books about praying than I've actually prayed, and I'm very sure I've read more books about the Bible than the actual Bible. And that's not okay. We want to address that. And the reason we want to address that is because we're a church. Full stop. And because the reason the church exists, and I don't mean our particular church, I mean all churches. All churches exist in order to make people or help people become more like Jesus, copying him. Because Jesus' last command to his disciples was to make disciples, which is a fancy way of saying to help men and women copy Jesus' lifestyle. We express that as a church by saying we want to see lives transformed into all God has for us. But to be transformed into all God has for us, we have to copy Jesus. We're in effect making disciples. And we want to look at doing that with prayer. Because a key part of Jesus' life is prayer. Jesus really clearly tells us to pray. And every other follower of Jesus, every one of the disciples, from Augustine to Wesley to Spurgeon, all of the guys that you think about, they're heroes of the faith, they all say pray. They don't say think about praying or read books about praying or sign up to an Instagram account that's about praying. They say actually pray. Because if the church is meant to help people be transformed into all God has for us, or to put it another way, to make disciples, it's no good learning about prayer without actually praying. There's no point listening to a sermon series where at the end of it you understand more about the Hebrew word for prayer or the history of prayer in the Bible if you don't pray, or you don't pray anymore. Because we're meant to be copying Jesus. And there's something about the way Jesus lives his life that is utterly dependent on and revolves around prayer. Because prayer allows Jesus to hear and respond to God's voice. It's through prayer that Jesus receives his identity and affirmation. Matthew 4, this is my son, and the Father says about Jesus, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. That's a prayer moment. They're speaking to one another. Jesus' purpose is directed through prayer. John 5, he says he can only do what he sees the Father doing. That's him talking about a prayer moment where he's seen what the Father's doing. He's been directed by the Father. He says elsewhere in John, I teach what the Father has told me to teach. That's come through prayer. His very life, Jesus' very life, is sustained through prayer. John 4, Jesus says, my bread is to do the will of him who sent me. Jesus delights in his relationship with God through prayer. So much so that the disciples, the guys that know Jesus best, the guys that he's gathered around to disciple and be transformed into all God has for them, what do they ask him? They ask him, show us how to pray. And Jesus, in reply, gives them what we now know as the Lord's Prayer. It's in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, and we're going to look at it particularly in Matthew 6, and it starts in verse 5. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you pray, key moment, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. I just want us to look at this very small phrase. Go into your room and close the door. Jesus couldn't be much clearer than that. And I want us for a moment just to step back. Perhaps they're incredibly familiar words to you, but let's try and remember that this is Jesus, the Son of God, who comes to earth, who's God in the flesh, who's teaching his disciples how to live a life like him. And he's only got 3 short years to do it, and he only does one teaching that outlines prayer so directly, and he includes this incredibly practical moment, and it makes it into 2 Gospels. Go into your room, close the door. Before you do anything, go into your room, close the door. Jesus is saying, before I can teach you, disciples, what to say and how to say it, how to approach the Father, actually you've got to be really practical. You've got to be really deliberate about prayer. You've got to do it on purpose. And the way you do it on purpose is you choose a place that you can be alone in the quiet with God in prayer. And that doesn't happen accidentally. Look how deliberate Jesus tells us to be. He says, don't wait for the inclination to take you, for the time to be right. or for your children to be quiet. He says, make a deliberate step. Go into your room, get away from the normality of life, get away from the hubbub, close the door, be in the quiet with him. Be deliberate about it. So, our prayer practice for this week is really simple. I want you to find a time and a place to pray. A time and a place that you can pray every day, but only for 2 minutes. Ironically, it's not about the prayer yet. It's actually just about finding a time and a place to pray. A time and a place that works for you, works for your schedule, works for your commitments. If you're a morning person, if you're an evening person. It's got to be a time and a place where you aren't going to be disturbed or distracted easily by people or things. So it's probably not going to be somewhere where you've got your phone or you've got your email or the television's blaring. And it's probably going to be in a time where the rest of your household aren't going to barge in. So it's probably going to be a time, if you've got young children, where they're not there. You see this in Jesus' life. He spent loads of time withdrawing to the lonely place, going into the wilderness, to get away from people, to get away from his disciples, to get away from people he loved, in order to be with his Father. He often goes early before they're awake and before they can follow him. For me personally, it's before the rest of my household gets up. It's downstairs in the kitchen. Early enough in the morning that I can carve out time where I'm not going to be disturbed, where my phone is not going to ring, where there are no meetings, where I can spend time alone in the Father's presence. And probably it's going to look different for each of us. The point this week is to just find a time and a place. Don't worry about how long you have it at first. It's just finding that place and that time for you to be alone with God in prayer. So take a few minutes in your meetup now to talk through the questions. They're attached on the email, or you can get them on the resources page of the website. Take a few minutes to discuss them and pray together and bless each other. Thanks for listening, guys. Bless you. Have a fantastic week.